Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. What becomes of a millennial crippled by an overdose of religion? Our next guest walks us through his disillusionment, loneliness, frustration, and anger with God over unexplainable evil. Thanks to seeing the vibrant faith and lives of missionaries enthusiastically absorbed in family softball and service, he comes to a deeper awakening to mystery, to life fully given and joyfully lived. Stephen Copeland is a writer and storyteller. He's a former staff writer and columnist at Sports Spectrum magazine, a national faith-based sports magazine, and he's also been published in Christianity Today. He's co-authored nearly a dozen books and is a Daggy Scholar and member of the International Thomas Merton Society. He obtained a bachelor's degree in journalism and Bible from Grace College. He currently resides in Nashville, Tennessee. You can follow more of his journey at copelandwrites.com on Twitter and on Instagram. Here to discuss his new book, Where the Colors Blend, an authentic journey through spiritual doubt and despair and a beautiful arrival at hope, is Stephen Copeland. Stephen, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Stephen, you have had a journey of ups and downs. You have had spiritual exhaustion, spiritual disappointment. You've seen it performance-based. You've seen it raw. And somewhere along the way, you had a complete spiritual meltdown, disconnect. Is there really a God? Going back to all the questions that you would think that somebody who was grounded in their faith would really not be asking. But a series of events and people in your life led you to and then through this journey that chronicles over a 7-year period of your life that really is poetic. It is prosaic in a beautiful way, chronicling a number of paradigm shifts in your life, and yet you're a young man, and the reality is that you are every young man of this generation that's searching for relevance, for real, tangible, meaningful, life-changing experiences with the God, creator of heaven and earth. How did this journey begin for you?
Yeah, no, so I grew up with a very good foundation, grew up in a Catholic family, really gave me a stable foundation moving through some of my formative years. I got involved in a non-denominational evangelical church when I was in high school, and this was very beneficial for me as well. It kind of ignited my heart. I feel like I could feel something for the first time. That was good for me. I went to Bible college at Grace College and Theological Seminary up in northern Indiana. This was really good for me because it ignited my mind, taking a lot of Bible classes, wrestling with theology, doctrine, all those fun things. But I think somewhere along the line, and I don't put it on any particular piece of that journey, but somewhere along the line, possibly because of my perfectionistic tendencies, maybe because of just someone growing up in the West who, in America, we're very performance driven. Everything is about waking up each day, getting after it. You work hard, you get the American dream, all these different kind of aspects of what it means. And those are all good things. Those aren't bad things. But as pertained to my spirituality, there was always this notion, this feeling that who I was at the core was a sinner, and that's it. Someone who was broken, lost, hopeless at the very core of my being. And that's just not a good starting place for a lot of people.
Stephen, you identify something that is commonly thrown around. You're born a sinner. We have the sin nature, but that seed that was planted in you, which is supposed to drive most of us to seeking redemption, became a seed that grew into a weed that gripped your heart with, this has been spoken into me, this is at the core, I've been told from birth, this is who I am, and if that's who I am, then how can that possibly be changed? How can I ever get out of that identification that I've been branded with? And it kind of makes us stop for a minute and pause and say, are we branding people as a sinner? And for those like yourself that are cerebral, that have deep, deep feelings, when you tell somebody they're unworthy, inadequate, they're a sinner at their very core, then when you strip everything away, which you have done, you are left with this picture, I'm just a sinner.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm no good.
Yeah. That's very well said. Yeah, you echoed so many things I write about in the book there. And because of this unhealthy starting place, for me, it kind of set me on a performance treadmill where I was just very dedicated to trying to get as close to God as I possibly could. And in the book, I write about how I felt like I was on a treadmill running as hard and as fast as I could, yet going nowhere at all. And eventually, the result was me kind of sliding off the treadmill, then looking up at God from this puddle of exhaustion and shame, and just saying, God, will you forgive me? And what I had neglected somewhere along the lines of my theology, that maybe God lives within us. Maybe God's already closer than close, is one of my mentors, Dave Hickman, says. Maybe he's already closer than close to us. So, yeah, I mean, there are a number of passages that, again, I think my perfectionistic, ultra-critical, judgmental, non-compassionate personality, and those things can make you great. You know, they can help me to look at a paragraph and pick out all the things that I would switch around, and you know, a different metaphor I can slip in. But as it pertains to my spirituality, I mean, I remember reading a passage from Jonathan Edwards, minister from the 1700s, where he said we're all just sinners in the hands of an angry God, and we're like spiders dangling on a thread over a fire. And so in this, I reference that passage because when I read that, it was like, okay, well, who am I at the core? I guess I'm a sinner. And who's God at the core? I guess he's angry. So there was about halfway through the book, after I have deconstructed rigid religion that was actually quite toxic for me, toxic experientially, in the sense that, like, I was just exhausted and I was miserable being a Christian.
Let me stop you there because I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves.
Sure. Yep.
And this is not a commentary on any denomination,
No.
but there are those which will drive home our unworthiness, our brokenness, our just filth.
Yeah.
That we are just covered with the filth of sin, and that without the shed blood of Jesus to wash us clean, then we can never be clean. But if you hear more about, in the message of how bad you are, how every behavior is in this classification of sin, and here's mortal sins, and here's venial sins, and you're reminded over and over and over and over and over again of this is sin, 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 then it almost is you have to resign yourself that I have to live the rest of my life dangling over this candle, dangling over this fire, and if the heat reaches me, I'm going to burn up.
Yeah.
And that's the end of me, and there's nothing worth redeeming in me, because every bit of identity as an image of God has been stripped away from me based on the doctrine on which you were raised under.
Yep.
And therefore, it takes some third party, It takes some rite of absolution. It takes some ritual of repetitive nature of performing saying certain things, doing certain things that will only buy you enough time until the next time in which you have to revisit again and give a full accounting and a full roster of here's all the things I've done wrong. And that's at the core of many of the major religious tenets of rules of discipline, books of discipline, catechism, religiosity, or a religious spirit of performance-based Christianity, that I could never be good enough. And for some people, like yourself, that became your identity, not the redemptive part, but the constant reminder of, and it speaks to how do you talk to the sensitive, philosophical, emotional, feeler who is taking in because you're wearing a black coat and you have a collar on, or you're in the pulpit and you're driving this message home, and you're a sponge and you're receiving it, and your psyche is actually being attacked, and your spirituality at the same time. And this was the crisis which you faced.
Yes. Yeah, very, very well said again. Most of the people I know, they're already critical of themselves. They're already, Richard Rohr, one of my favorite writers, he writes that it's been proven now through neuroscience that our brain has a negative bias, that our brain will automatically cling to uncertainty, unknowing, that negative email you received 2 weeks ago, that negative comment that someone said, the fight that you had with someone you love, your brain clings to these things and tries to find resolve for these things. And he writes that it takes 8 to 12 seconds or something like that to savor a positive thought for it to leave a unique imprint on your brain. So the only reason I say that is because as it pertains to the psyche, and I'm no psychologist or neuroscientist for that matter, but I find this stuff very interesting. But as it pertains to the psyche, we're already bent towards our lack. We're already bent toward, well, I need to find resolve in this area. Well, I really want that raise. I want that job. I want to find that spouse. I want this. I want that, so, and I do, and again, like you said earlier, my book is not an attack on any particular denomination. I do understand that there are some people in the Christian realm and across all religious realms who do need very strict rules, very strict boundaries. They need the 10 things. They need, what they can and can't do, the do's and the don'ts. For most millennials, as your opening quote from Brother Paul Quinnen, Trappist monk at Abbey of Gethsemane, said, for me, this rigid religion only re-emphasized this notion that who I was at the core was someone who was broken, someone who was a sinner, someone who was lost. And Rohr writes, too, that when you rip Jesus out of the Trinity, you have to come up with some of these notions, and that makes sense. Once you take Jesus out of the Trinity, well, then you get something like substitutionary atonement theory, where God was so angry at humanity that he had to sacrifice his son. So then, in my being a thinker, being someone who just wanders down these paths in my brain, I write about this in the book. It's like, okay, so even if I do accept Jesus, but Jesus is just reuniting me with an angry God, then what's the point of that? So it's these two questions, who am I at my core and who is God at his core? But, if the whole biblical narrative is rather God getting us back to union, one writer put that God is the hound of heaven. God is pursuing the ultimate prize of his affection. That's what I see in the biblical narrative, and that's refreshing to me. That's inspiring to me. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I'm picturing you and I going to France and walking into the Louvre.
Mm.
And the old Stephen Copeland standing there in front of the Mona Lisa, the Rembrandts, the Picassos, the magnificent masterpieces, scans the room and says, you know, that picture's crooked.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Because our mind's eye, when you walk into a room, the natural inclination for us when we see pictures hung or we see something framed is our natural eye looks for the flaw.
Yep.
Our natural eye does not look for perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So where you were being oriented, where you were grounded in was because I am convinced by religion that I am fatally flawed.
Yep.
Then my worldview is going to be, I'm going to look at and be drawn towards that which I can identify with, which is also fatally flawed. The crooked picture at the Louvre, the most magnificent museum in the world, but all I see is, wow, Mona Lisa is crooked. Not Mona Lisa, wow, that's incredible. I'm staring at the brushstrokes. Not, can you know, somebody needs to tell them it's a quarter, it's an eighth inch off. You know,
Right.
Listen, I'm going to go over and get the guy. Can you tell me who's in charge here? Because the Mona Lisa is crooked. Does that describe kind of part of your journey?
Absolutely. No, it's a beautiful, entertaining, and funny illustration. And I think most of us are bent towards looking at the negative, looking at the lack. And for me, that's something that contemplation, meditation, recentering prayer, things like that really help for me because it forces you to focus on your own enoughness and belovedness detached from all these things, even things in your life that are lacking. You're still the beloved. You're still deeply loved by Christ. But no, that's a great illustration.
You know, as I hear you talk, and I'm a Pentecostal, charismatic, spirit-filled Jew. I came to faith in Jesus at age 44 after being raised in rabbinical Judaism. The laws, the boundaries of trying to live a Mosaic life was overwhelming. It's overwhelming to many. And I find that religion, I've often said that Christianity is the worst thing that ever happened to Christ.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Religion is the worst thing that ever happened to God, because once man got his hands on it and began to massage it into man's image, not to God's image, then we began to lose the reverent fear and the awe and the wonder and the beauty of a heart so willing to give his all in all for us, even though we break every rule he gives us. He has paved the way to forgiveness. You can't go down any road in the Bible that doesn't lead you to redemption and forgiveness.
Yeah.
No matter what path you take, it all, whether it's the prodigal son, whether or not it's 40 years of wandering the wilderness, there was a plan of redemption for the children of Israel. Now, so you're in this season of despair, a season of doubt. How long, let me ask you, how old are you?
I just turned 30 about 6 months ago.
Okay.
So I'll be 31 next year. Yeah.
So for about, what would you say, 17, 20, 22 years of this identity crisis was brewing within you, and you came to look at the man in the mirror and you were in despair.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. How long did it last? My ultra critical, perfectionistic tendencies seem to become even more amplified, oddly enough, the deeper I went into Christianity. So the more passionate I got about my faith, which for me, Catholicism laid a really good foundation for me. But then I really got passionate about my faith, reading books, digging into the Bible, getting a Bible degree. So the more passionate I got about it, the more dedicated I became to, really trying to figure this thing out called spirituality. The more shame I felt. So by the time that I moved down to Charlotte, from northern Indiana, where I went to school, which is at the start of the book, there were all these things going on in my subconscious, and I had a ton of doubts about my faith. I would go to bed thinking, really, should I be feeling this miserable and this shackled with shame? And if so, even if I am following the one true way, is it worth feeling like this the rest of my life? So this really came, this really got to a place of I have to do something, I think, after about 2 or 3 years in Charlotte, where I was no longer around all my best friends at Grace College. I was no longer around my mentor at Grace College, one of the main characters in the book. And I was finally forced to confront these things within myself that I already knew were true, but I was able to push them down and run from them because I could distract myself with relationships or, anything else. So,
Stephen, what you described, the Lord gives you visuals. The Lord gave me a visual that religion was the magnifying glass and you were the ant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that it started out where the magnifying glass was far away, so the heat wasn't so intense. But the more religious you got, the closer the magnifying glass got to you, to the point where you were feeling the direct heat, and it was like being fried in place and consumed by this religious spirit, which was just enveloping you and causing you to question everything. And you chronicle that in the book in a very, very eloquent way. So you're at this crossroads. And it's very interesting because Jeremiah tells us that when you're at the crossroads, choose the ancient path, and there you'll find your peace. This is what you did. You chose the ancient path, which was to strip away a lot of man-made stuff and enter into a relationship with God. How did that play out in your life, and how does it play out in the book?
Yeah, so about halfway through the book, after I had really deconstructed that rigid religion that you talk about, where the magnifying glass is just burning me, the ant, I met a guy named Dave. We kind of mysteriously connected at a coffee shop in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Dave wrote a book called Closer Than Close, Awakening to the Freedom of Your Union with Christ. And Dave kind of saw me walking through a coffee shop, and I was balancing some binders, and I kind of looked disheveled, probably similar to how I look right now. And he was like, I bet that guy's a writer. And I was at least trying to be. And he approached me, and we just kind of, again, we mysteriously connected. We sat down. He said he needed help on his book. And I asked him a little bit more about his book, and he told me that he was a guy who had gotten into ministry and had a number of panic attacks as a pastor because of this same notion that he never felt like he could get close enough to God, that his enoughness was always on trial. And that, I write in the book that I was not only on the performance treadmill, but I felt like God was controlling the treadmill, never letting me off, never letting me enter into a state of rest, a state of peace. So as you can imagine, even though Dave needed help on his book, he was really meeting me where I was at. And what he helped introduce to me was a different starting place. And he kind of dove into this idea that maybe we're already close to God than we can possibly imagine. And he kind of broke the human experience down into three parts, where if you picture a target, your very core, which that's the main question, right? You know, that was the main question leading to my identity crisis. Who am I at the core? Dave was saying that at the core of you is not sinner. At the core of you is spirit. At the core of you is the beloved. At the core of you is something truer than true. You being united with the divine, with Christ. You're being animated in and through. Then outside of that, outside of the core, is soul, and that's your mind, your intellect, your emotions, your heart, your ego. You know, things that are very good, but also things that have to be navigated. And then outside of that was the body, and he really introduced me to this idea. A lot of it, to me, it's throughout the whole Bible. You know, where in Genesis, it's God's breath that brings Adam to life, that makes Adam a living being. And then even when you look at a word like Yahweh, like the Hebrew, you know, it refers to breath, Yahweh. This is all hinting at the unspeakable. It's all hinting at the depth to your very self, where it's capital L love that's animating you. But he really took me through the main passage that stands out. And I put a large portion of it in the book, is John 17, where Jesus prays this incredibly mystical prayer before he is arrested. And, you know, he's saying, God, may they be in us just as I am in you, and just as you're in me, may they be in you. And it's this beautiful, unconditional circle dance that we're being invited into. And you're already there. And that was so freeing for me. And I'm not out to change anyone in this book. I'm not out to get anyone to think the way that I think. But for me, this was very freeing to realize that the truest thing about me is that I am the beloved. A big book that really helped kind of form my thinking was Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. And he says in the book, I kept running around it in large or small circles, looking for someone or something to convince me that I was the beloved. And that was very much my life before being introduced to this new starting place, where I would go into a romantic relationship and the underlying narrative was, please convince me that I'm loved. I would work on a book project. I was working in a sports magazine at the time, so I'd publish an article, a column, or a feature story, and it was, okay, please give me the feedback so that I can believe that I'm loved. And Dave was saying, like, no, you're already the beloved. Now let's just allow what's true at the core to permeate through every single aspect of your being, which is a lot of work. That's a lot of work, but it's work from a different state. It's work from a posture of rest, a posture of being, not so much doing. Dave once told me that growing spiritually is a lot like working on your tan. You simply go outside, you position yourself beneath the sun, and you enjoy the rays, and you rest, and you be. And you're no longer using anyone or anything to convince yourself that you're the beloved. You're already the beloved, and just let that soak in. So he kind of introduced me to this new starting place and resurrect what was already true within me, helped me become aware of that.
We're talking with Stephen Copeland, author of Where the Colors Blend, an authentic journey through spiritual doubt and despair, and a beautiful arrival at hope. You may be in that exact same place where religion has convinced you you are unworthy, that you are as far away from God as you can possibly be, and there is no redemptive plan, there is no hope, there is no beginning for you to fall in love with the one who already fell in love with you. The one who in 2 Samuel 14:14 says, like water falls to the ground and does not return, we all must die, but God does not desire that. He devises ways for those who are estranged from him to return. The love of the Father for each one of us as their child. We've been indoctrinated for many of us to believe that we were born a sinner, we were raised a sinner, we're going to die a sinner. But God has a much better message if we would just incline our ears not to the voice of man, but to the voice of the Lord. Stephen Copeland has done that and turned a life of despair and doubt into a beautiful arrival of hope. He's going to continue that story with us after these announcements. We'll be right back. Shalom, I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I've got a question for you. What do you think they're doing with your DNA? Oh, you know that 23andMe kit that you sent off and you got back that report that told you you were Irish, you were French, you were Jewish? Wonder who's interested in that information. It's not like you've sent it off to a database with millions of other people and they can steal your identity, and who would really be interested in that information other than you? Well, maybe your friends and family, but there's one, yes, one who is so interested in your DNA that it would be something that would make you afraid. And that is Satan himself. Why would Satan be interested in your DNA? Because there is a Y chromosome marker that determines whether or not you are in the line of Aaron. That's right, the biblical line of Aaron the priest. That's because if the priesthood comes back and the high priest takes his role as the head of the Sanhedrin, they will be the ones to call for the return of Jesus. Well, what can they do with your DNA? Well, there are 40-plus countries weaponizing DNA today. And imagine if Satan could weaponize your DNA and use that Y chromosome marker to take out the line of the high priest, then Jesus doesn't come back. That is the plot behind the best-selling book, The Codex, now out in second edition, on Kindle, $2.99, also available in paperback. This is a biblical thriller beyond comparison that's going to take you on an incredible journey to understand what they could do with your DNA. I also want to encourage you to visit our website, ignitinganation.com, and click on special offers. There you're going to find the yellow cover of this book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. We're going to take you on a journey in the Garden of Eden to the seed, the ground, all the way out to the fruit that reveals things of the natural that God is trying to reveal supernatural truths. Contained within these pages are 7 laws and 7 lessons within each law. They're going to take you on an incredible journey of understanding about the life you live and the fruit you bear. I want to encourage you to click on that yellow cover. We're going to ask for your email. Now, we won't send you spam because spam is not kosher, but we will send you the first chapter of this book. I want to encourage you to get 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Barnes & Noble, you can get it at Books A Million, wherever great Christian books are sold. Take this journey with me to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden and to the Tree of Life we see again at the River of Life. Get your copy today. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Stephen Copeland, author of Where the Colors Blend, an authentic journey through spiritual doubt and despair and a beautiful arrival at hope. Stephen, welcome back to the program.
Thank you again for having me. Really enjoying the talk.
Stephen, you had a number of paradigm shifts in the area of being spiritually exhausted, running the race, but being so, it's as if you wanted to be in the marathon, to run the race that Paul says to run, keep your eye on the prize and run the race, and yet at the end of the race you had torn Achilles tendons, you fell down, broke both hands, shattered your elbows, and had a concussion. And there you are laying there and saying, hey, I thought I ran the good race, but I now need to be put completely back together again because it was the race that killed me. Who am I, and can I be put back together again? And so we laid the foundation for that breaking apart, breaking of that chrysalis that you were confined within until the chrysalis finally was stripped away from you, and you then were able to break out of that chrysalis and become who you are today which is this beautiful arrival at hope.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a mentor, which was kind of like, if you're going to apply rules, rule number one, get yourself a mentor. Get yourself somebody that's really grounded, not in religious, with the religious spirit, but within a relationship with God. So how did you navigate this, and how did you begin to see how God used all of the negative experiences, because those don't go away? Okay, you experience those things. But in order to embrace the message of Genesis 50, verse 20, which what the enemy meant for evil, or what my brothers meant for evil, God worked for good so that many would be saved, you kind of lived out that period of time for almost 20 years of the enemy using all this for evil. But then along comes this new beginning for you. How did you begin to embrace that new beginning, and were you able to strip away to get to the core that needed to be gotten to be rotated 180 degrees?
Yeah. Yeah, so as we talked about in the first segment, Dave, my mentor, really introduced me to this idea of a new starting place, that at the core of who you are is the beloved. At the core of who you are is someone who is united with the divine, united with Christ, that there's something true within you, animating you in and through, and that you are the beloved. So that's a new core starting point rather than sinner, broken. So how did that play out? And that's really the remainder of the book, experientially. So one of my favorite writers, Irish philosopher named Peter Rollins, he tells this pretty humorous parable that I've really grown to love. And he talks about a guy who ends up in psychoanalysis because he is just convinced that he is a seed, like a seed that you would plant a plant with, or a seed that animals eat. And the man undergoes intense psychoanalysis. The psychoanalyst eventually convinces him to believe that he's not a seed. So the man finally gets released. He goes home. He lives in a little farmhouse, bunch of animals all around his property, chickens, cows, all that stuff. Within being 30 minutes at his house, the man ends up frantically going back to the psychoanalyst, banging on his door, saying, and he's just having a borderline panic attack, to which the psychoanalyst answers, says, "What happened? You know that you're not a seed." To which the man responds, "I know that, but do the chickens know?" Mm-hmm. And I like this because for me, I knew that I was the beloved. I was choosing to rewire the neural pathways in my mind to be less critical of myself, to get off of the performance treadmill, to choose to believe that there is something is true, is capital L love, animating me. And yet, whenever I experienced a frustration in my career, that belovedness was on trial. Whenever I experienced rejection or betrayal in a relationship, my inherent belovedness and enoughness was on trial. So I found that those areas that were closest to my heart, within the soul of my interior castle, those were the chickens in my life. Those were the areas where I was most tempted to believe that I was still a seed, even though I knew I wasn't a seed. So for now, my spiritual journey from that point on it's been allowing this inerrant light of belovedness to permeate through, and to get curious about, to kind of walk through those dark hallways within the soul of my interior castle, as St. Teresa of Avila puts it. To visit those dark rooms, those cobweb crevices, those places I haven't been in for a while, those places I'm afraid to go into because that's where my belovedness is on trial. But to go into those rooms and dare to believe that even there, even in the vulnerability and the frailty, that I'm the beloved. So that's kind of how this has been lived out for me. experientially in my spirituality.
Stephen, as you navigated the Bible in college and now navigating the Bible from uh, this new perspective of arriving at hope, were there particular parts of the Bible that took on new meaning to you, particular characters of the Bible that you saw from a completely different perspective now that you had your lens change, your vision change? You went to the doctor said, you think you're 20/20, but that's your internal view. Your external view is 2400. I'm going to have to change your prescription, and your external view is going to have to parallel your internal views, so I'm going to give you a new set of lenses. Now you're going to still look at the same things, but you're going to look at them with more clarity. Now that you go back to the Word of God and you find that this is a loving God, this is a nurturing God, this is a God that provides ways out, not punishment. He's not the mighty smiter from Bruce Almighty. He's not the God that's looking to destroy the earth. He's the one that's protecting the seed line of the Messiah, so that we can get to this point 2,000 years ago where our redemption is brought for us, and it's a gift of love, and that every consequence of the people who got in the way of this seed line, that God was protecting us so that we could arrive at this point in our lives, 5,000 years later, with a secure relationship with God through the shed blood of Jesus. What part of the Bible became different and unique, and now you hold on to as a lifeline, as opposed to a story of condemnation, bitterness, and destruction?
Yeah, great question. So to be honest with you, I had to take a break from reading the Bible for a while. And I think for a lot of millennials who have just been pounded with the Bible, especially a lot of Protestant millennials or evangelical millennials, they need to take a break from the Bible, because whenever I would open that thing, the performance tape started playing in my head again. It's like, you have to do this to get closer to God. And if you don't nail your daily devotional, if you don't nail being present that morning, then God is angry at you. So I had to take a really long break from reading the Bible regularly. And to be frank, like, I'm still getting there. Like, there's still a notion that terrifies me of reading the Bible every day again. That being said, whenever I do go back through, whether that's in a book that I'm reading, and it's a biblical passage that someone's quoting, or me going into the scriptures myself, it is incredibly more interesting to me, because I'm no longer reading the word to reaffirm the God of certainty. I'm no longer just trying to be, because I used to read the Bible just because I wanted to be right. I wanted to have all the correct doctrine, all the correct theology. And I would then take that and I would judge others because I was somehow smarter, because I read this and I somehow had the exact interpretation of that. So now it's become more experiential. The text now is an invitation into mystery. It's something to be changed by, not something to use for my own arrogance. There are and Richard Rohr, I quoted him in the first segment, but he writes about this too, how the biblical narrative, it kind of shows this evolution of human consciousness where at times it's very tribal, and it is very, God is angry at you. Well, when you look through the cultural context, that could have been absolutely normal, because most of the gods were, they believed in a 3-tiered universe. There was hell, there was earth, and then there was heaven. So they're looking up and God's looking down. And so the way that things were explained by some of the writers all of a sudden made a lot of sense from their own vantage point. But then, like, as it goes on, in the biblical narrative, you keep seeing a God who is relentlessly pursuing an oppressed people group that has the boot of empire on their neck. And that is incredible today, in my opinion. And then when you get into the New Testament, when, according to Christian tradition, the face of God is revealed, God enters in through the incarnation, through Christ. Jesus keeps pursuing those on the outside. On the outside of the religious empire and outside of the societal norms, the societal empire. And then Paul keeps doing the same thing, where he's bringing Jews and Gentiles together. And how Christianity became something that was exclusive is a mystery to me, because the whole biblical text is inclusive. And it's people on the margins, people on the edges, who you see God being that hound of heaven, relentlessly pursuing. So in viewing the text through the lens of union brings on a different notion as well, where now when I read a book of the Bible, it's like, okay, maybe I can awaken more to something that's already true in me. Maybe this can be the device, the tool that helps me to awaken something that's already true, rather than, okay, I'm reading this so I can be right whenever I debate my friend. So yeah, that's a really good question, but it has definitely taken on an entirely different meaning for me. And it's experiential now, and it's fun, and it's something you enter into and you're changed by it.
As you're living out, because you had the Bible education, because you went to Bible college, it's kind of like David that said, "Thy word have I hidden in my heart, that I might not sin against you, O Lord." You had this framework that was given to you, that what the church expected. Now you've moved into this, I'm now devoid of church, and now I'm in relational pursuit. And that relational pursuit is going to bring me full circle to the relationship with the one that I thought was condemning me, but actually I was getting the wrong signal, because it was man telling me, not God telling me. Now I'm inclining my ear to what God is telling me and listening clearly for his voice and seeking in experiences, which is the Millennial Creed. Is I want to experience. I want relevance. I don't want to hear your story. I want to live your story. I want to go to the mountains. I want to go play in the ball game. And I want to sit around and talk about the ball game afterwards. And I want to climb this mountain, and I want to talk about what it was like the journey up, what it was like at the top, what the journey down was like, where I stopped along the way. That's what I want to experience, and that's what I want to discuss, because that's where the relevance comes in. And now your challenge is to merge the two back into a God-centered view that says that my hope is in the Lord, not in myself. My trust is in the Lord, not in myself, and I can fully experience the journey of the prophets. I can fully experience the journey of Paul. I can fully experience the journeys of Matthew, Mark, Luke. I can fully experience the John the Revelator in being at Patmos and laying up against a rock and drifting off and having God reveal things to me, and know that I'm not filtering through the lens of condemnation, but God is trying to send me a beautiful message, and it may look like a fiery furnace, as it did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but it wasn't the fiery furnace that he wanted us to concentrate on. It was the redemptive power and the presence of God even in the fiery furnace. So it's a paradigm shift, which you've chronicled beautifully. I think that your prose is eloquent. It is fully experiential. You take us on a number of pilgrimages and journeys that have helped made you aware that hope is a joyful pursuit, and that yes, we are the victims of a sin committed in the Garden of Eden, that we're pre-wired that way, but we have the ability to be supernatural electricians, and we get to change the wiring pattern to where instead of getting a negative charge, we're going to get a positive charge. And that really is what your book is about, is taking us on that journey to finding a beautiful arrival at hope. Now, here you are, a completely different person than you were when you started this journey. But do you see how much larger the journey is on this side of it, and how much brighter and broader and more impactful it will be for you as you now have this hope? Now you are charged with sharing this hope with others. That's what the book is doing.
Yeah.
That's what these interviews are doing. Do you feel like a new mantle has been placed on your shoulders to carry a message forward?
Yeah, and I think for a lot of young people specifically who go through something of deconstruction, of breaking down their background, their tradition, rigid religion as it was for me, whatever it was, I think it's really easy to look back on who you were and beat yourself up for it. And to quote Rohr again, he talks about how the great spiritual journey is to transcend and include. So I do look back on my ignorance and my doctrinal theological arrogance. But part of being the beloved is no longer judging myself for that stage of my journey either. You know, Rohr talks about the three boxes, how you have order, disorder, and reorder. So he says that a lot of conservatives get stuck in order because it's, no, this is the only way, everyone else is wrong. A lot of progressives get stuck in disorder because they just keep pointing the finger, and they, you know, the church is awful, Christians are bad, you know, my whole theology betrayed me, the church, you know, and for some people that's legitimate, you know, like that's a legitimate scar, and I don't want to downplay that. But for me, it was all part of my journey to now being in reorder and to transcend and include those and be like, yeah, I'm glad that whenever I was overcome with so many doubts about my faith, that I hunkered down and I read apologetics. That was part of my intellectual journey. I'm glad that in high school, it was very charismatic. It was very emotional. That was part of my heart journey. And so but yeah, I do feel a certain, I enjoy having the ability to free people up the way Dave helped free me up. To say you're already there.
Right.
And you're the beloved.
And that is the message behind this incredible book, Where the Colors Blend, an authentic journey through spiritual doubt and despair, and a beautiful arrival at hope. Stephen Copeland, a poet laureate, a man of many words, who is an artist at painting a picture of moving and navigating from doubt and despair into a beautiful arrival at hope and a future of impacting a generation that is desperate for hope and has been judged and is looking for identity, and you've given them a pathway to find their identity in God without it being a religious doctrine. And so I thank you for sharing this incredible story with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the talk.
God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.